revenue projections.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we all know that last year was indeed a tough year in the goods-producing sector of our economy. We've seen the pulp and paper and the forestry and the mills hit particularly hard. And Mr. Speaker, imagine what would have happened in Port Hawkesbury if that party had been in government. We would not have a plant that is back in production right now and able to contribute to the growth in our gross domestic product in the coming year, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the overall unemployment rate for Nova Scotia is 9.5%, and that hides a more concerning problem in rural Nova Scotia, with all regions outside of Halifax struggling with double-digit unemployment. Cape Breton is 18.6%, the North Shore 12.9%, Annapolis Valley 11.5%, and the Southern Region 13.2%. In every region of the province, unemployment has increased since June 2009. Our provincial economy stalled in 2012 with GDP only growing at 0.2% overall, meaning that rural Nova Scotia's economy has gone into reverse. Mr. Speaker, will the Finance Minister explain to all those Nova Scotians who have lost confidence in her government how she plans to maintain her overly rosy fiscal projections in the face of these dire facts?
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, what the honourable member conveniently fails to say is that the number of people who are looking for work is growing in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, that is an indicator of an expanded labour force, greater confidence. There are more people working today in Nova Scotia than there were 4 years ago, Mr. Speaker. There are more people in our labour force and more people who had given up under that crowd over there who are back into the labour force, Mr. Speaker, because they know good jobs are being created in this province.
The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Minister of Education thanked Wayne McKay and the members of the Task Force on Bullying and Cyberbullying for their hard work. She also recommended that acting on the Task Force recommendations is an important part of the NDP's plan for education. One of the important recommendations from the Task Force was number 64 on page 92. It recommends that the Department of Education create or adopt a digital citizenship and an online safety program for elementary and junior high students, and that students should be required to take the program before having access to school computers. So my question to the Minister is, after having the Task Force recommendations for more than a year, when will the Minister of Education finally take action on recommendation 64?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that question. We have been working on the digital citizenship component of this within the department. We are looking at all of our programs and our curriculum from primary to grade 12 to make sure that our children are receiving the appropriate education around citizenship and digital work at their age-appropriate level. We're making sure that it's as robust as we need it to, because we need to make sure that our children are having the information to make themselves safe when they're working on the internet. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton North on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, everybody believes that the parents have a role to play when it comes to their children's online activities. We also know that technology changes quickly and that many parents are not computer literate as they'd like to be. Recommendation 66 of the Task Force on Bullying and Cyberbullying asks the Department of Education to create or adopt a program to improve technological and digital literacy for parents and community members. Recommendation 67 suggests the Department of Education create a digital and printed parents' guide to combat bullying and cyberbullying to be made available each September. So my question to the Minister is, when will the Minister adopt recommendations 66 and 67 and finally give parents the tools they need to help combat bullying and cyberbullying?
Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the questions. And because we're approaching our response in a collaborative manner, I am going to ask our lead minister to answer that, the Minister for the Status of Women. Thank you.
The Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As recently as yesterday, I spent time discussing this very recommendation with Professor McKay. It's certainly been a topic of interest to a lot of Nova Scotians because I think we all recognize we need to better understand the use of technology and its responsible use, I should say. And certainly, while we value the perspective of the task force on bullying and cyberbullying on this issue, I think there's probably a wider community response in terms of providing learning materials to adults, parents and guardians and grandparents and others. And we're certainly looking at it from a broad perspective. I think there's a role for libraries, there's a role for parents associations and others. But I want to say there's already excellent materials on this issue that are available through Cyber Safe Girls and many other cyber programs. Thank you. And so I just want to say that we are collecting what's currently available and looking at what more needs to be done on this issue. Thank you.
Honourable member for Cape Breton North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, another task force recommendation, number 68, recommends the Department of Education identify opportunities to incorporate social and emotional learning into school curriculum offerings. My question is, when will the Minister of Education finally adopt recommendation 68 and all the task force recommendations that have not yet been addressed?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will ask the lead minister to respond to this question. Thank you. That's the Minister for the Status of Women.
The Honourable Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We could obviously go through these recommendations one by one, but I want to assure the House that a number of them have been included in the action plan that has been led by the Department of Education and the Minister. A number of them are actually under active consideration, and we're revisiting the rest. And certainly, as I've said in the past, the recommendations and research from the task force have made a valuable contribution, and we will continue to look at them one by one to make sure that in some way the intent of those recommendations are met. We're doing this with the input and advice from Professor McKay, and I certainly plan to be meeting with other members of the original task force to get their perspective, because obviously as time goes on things change a little, but we value the work that's gone into that, and we will honor their work. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question is for the Minister of Energy. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is a government which would rather put Nova Scotia's energy future in the hands of the Newfoundland government and Nova Scotia Power rather than the made in Nova Scotia options that most of the experts now say would be cheaper than the Maritime Link. Mr. Speaker, on April 25th, the Consumer Advocate sent a letter to the Minister of Energy in response to his comments here in question period and also to the media, in which he said the assumption the time frame provides adequate time is not correct. And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, does the Minister of Energy believe the Consumer Advocate is wrong?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, we have a made in Nova Scotia policy here for our energy in this province, and we're diversifying, getting away from coal that has been the base of our energy for far, far too long, and coal has gone up in price for the last 7 or 8 years, and now we're diversifying into wind and tidal and sustainable biomass and natural gas, heritage hydro, and the Maritime Link is an important part of that mix that will allow us to look at more renewables and more sources of energy from other jurisdictions. So I think the UARB process is unfolding as it should, and we'll await the decision by the end of July.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, earlier in question period, the Premier tried to claim his government was standing up for ratepayers, and yet he and his minister dismissed the very representative of ratepayers at the hearing. You know, Mr. Speaker, in the same letter that I already tabled, the consumer advocate said to the minister, quote, "The refusal to provide additional time raises the query whether the province is more interested in pushing the project through the public hearing process than ensuring the project is given a thorough and considered review." Mr. Speaker, does the Minister of Energy think the consumer advocate is wrong?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, during this whole process, through the development of the Maritime Link Act and then the regulations that were out last summer for consultation, we heard from various parties. We never heard from the Liberal Party at all, but we certainly did hear from the consumer advocate, and we actually, Department of Energy staff sat down with him, and he had some useful information to pass along to us about the scope of the project, and we listened, and we continue to listen to Nova Scotians, and that's an important part of the process. So again, the UARB is considering all the evidence, and we'll look forward to their decision within sometime this summer.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister well knows that we, at the time of the regulations, endorsed the consumer advocate's position. As he has written the board and said and acknowledged that very fact, that the fact that the consumer advocate had said that might work. The consumer advocate has now seen that information and has said no more time is needed. The minister can change it with the regulations. Continuing on with the letter, the consumer advocate says, quote, "There is a massive amount of information to assimilate. The applicants who were able to delay filing the application when they needed more time appear to be the only entities which have had the advantage of adequate time." So, Mr. Speaker, why does the Minister of Energy believe that Nova Scotia Power deserved adequate time, but nobody else does?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We certainly consulted with the consumer advocate. For further, I want to turn it over to the Premier for a comment.
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, all they have with respect to Muskrat Falls is cynicism and despair. That's what they're peddling, Mr. Speaker. No facts, no alternative project. But I want to read for the member for Dartmouth East the comments of the speech today from the Honourable Jim Prentice to the Maritime Energy Association. This is what he said, Mr. Speaker. He said, "When I was in politics, I had the privilege of serving as both the industry minister and the environment minister. These experiences left me with an affinity for the kind of development that helps generate widespread and long-term prosperity and is at the same time environmentally sustainable. In my view, Lower Churchill is all of this and more. It is a transformational project for Atlantic Canada that will take the region to a new level of industrial development, Mr. Speaker.
Order. 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 The Honourable Premier has the floor. Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the comments of the Honourable Mr. Prentice is not about despair. It is about hope and optimism. It is about confidence in the people of Atlantic Canada, something the member for Dartmouth East knows nothing about.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, evidence is mounting that the Maritime Link is not the lowest cost alternative to meet Nova Scotia's energy needs. Can't hear myself. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The consumer advocate and small business advocate, who represent the ratepayers, hired a consultant to analyze this mega project. And he wrote, and I quote, "The comparative analysis is oversimplistic, lacks robustness, and appears stacked to support the applicant's desired outcome." End of quote. The ORB's own consultant filed evidence that the Maritime Link project has not been demonstrated to be a definitive least cost incremental supply resource for an SPI system. My question to the minister, with the expert testimony piling up that states the Maritime Link is not the lowest cost alternative, will the minister agree to extend the review time for the UARB so that a truly fair and independent analysis can be done? And I'll table it.
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, at the UARB, there's a lot of evidence been presented. Certainly, interveners and experts, and I think about the majority of those experts, 9 out of the 14 actually, are presenting evidence that it is a positive event. It's the right way to go. It will provide the lowest, fairest rates for Nova Scotians. So let's let the UARB do their job and look and you know, to test and come across all that evidence. It's really their role to make that determination.
The honourable member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The NDP is doing everything it can to force ratepayers to absorb the cost of Muskrat Falls and pay for its expensive electricity schemes. This government created new legislation that stripped the decision-making power of the UARB through the Maritime Link Act. This act removes the authority of the UARB to make an independent decision. Will the minister explain why it is necessary to implement new legislation to remove power from an independent review board and give it to the government?
The Honourable, the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, sometimes it gets quite noisy in this chamber, and perhaps the Honourable Member missed the quote that was read a few minutes ago, so I'm going to read it again from the Honourable Jim Prentice. And Mr. Prentice had this to say just at lunchtime today. Quote, when I was in politics, I had the privilege of serving as both industry minister and environment minister. Wow. These experiences left me with an affinity for the kind of development that helps generate widespread and long-term prosperity and is, at the same time, environmentally sustainable. In my view, Lower Churchill is all this and more. It is a transformational project for Atlantic Canada that will take the region to a new level of industrial development. I hope the Honourable Member has heard that this time. I'll table that.
Why is Conservative an oxymoron?
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Well, if it makes the minister feel good, I'll read it again, Mr. Speaker. This is a 35-year decision, a $1.5 billion decision that will affect multiple generations of Nova Scotians. Yet this government, one that says it is for transparency and fairness, has ordered that it receive less scrutiny than it deserves. Clearly, this government must not be open to an independent, fair review of the project, or why else would they not agree to an extensive review at the time? Will the minister explain why his government had to order that power be removed from the independent review board and that an arbitrary deadline of 6 months be given to complete the review?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly you know, we have a reasonable time frame here that would allow for decision-making to be made based on the evidence that's presented before the UARB. And unlike the Conservative Party, this party has a plan, has a vision for an energy future that is sustainable and will provide rates for 35 years. So I say to the Conservative member, stop being a Luddite.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, on November 1st, 2012, I questioned the Finance Minister on her intentions to streamline the bureaucratic duplication with regards to the Nova Scotia film tax credit. At the time, she stated, and quote, "We are doing the analysis on the process." However, here we are months later, and it seems that nothing has taken place. The applicants are still frustrated by the process, and seemingly no progress has been made by the minister. Mr. Speaker, will the minister tell Nova Scotians what steps she has taken since November 1st, when she committed to meeting with the industry and fixing what seems to be a broken process?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. The film industry, as we know, is a very important industry in the province, and the film tax credit is a tool to support and advance the growth of that industry, and it has certainly been a benefit to the industry and to the province. Recently, we have had the hiring of a new person to oversee Film Nova Scotia, and there's been some expansion of their mandate with respect to the creative industries, and a new CEO has been hired. And in the fullness of time, Mr. Speaker, there will be the work that I made reference to in the fall. It's still our intention to proceed with a review. It will be a robust review that will involve the industry to gather up all of their perspectives. Some of those perspectives I've already heard as I meet with people individually, and we will continue to work with that industry to ensure that they are stable and prosperous in our province.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the tax credit is important and it's a powerful tool to our economy, but it is disappointing that these problems are persisting with the processing of the applications. The minister has had ample time since I first brought this to her attention, and now we have another example of procedural duplication and frustratingly low processing times. Mr. Speaker, I will table a letter that was sent to the minister on April 1st of this year and the accompanying email, as well as the correspondence that I tabled when the issue was raised last November. I'm going to table. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the fact that the minister is now undertaking the review is too late. We need a more urgent response because this is going to send industry participants, filmmakers, to other provinces if we don't address it. Mr. Speaker, since I made the minister aware of these problems over 5 months ago, why has there been no progress made in eliminating the frustratingly slow processing times for this tax credit?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated to the honourable member, the film industry is very important. The tax credit is very important. There is some reorganization going on at the level of the Film and the Creative Industries Council, and there is a working group within government that are starting to define the parameters of a review and a consultation. And as I indicated, that consultation can only take place with the full involvement of those in the industry who know it best, and that certainly will occur. With respect to the administration of the film tax credit, in the Department of Finance, I have met with officials in the department. We have identified parts of that process which we think have been impediments to a timely response to applicants, and we have been working diligently to remove those impediments, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about today around the film tax credit really amounts to red tape, to slow processes, to an inability to respond to business. Mr. Speaker, the film industry in our province is worth millions of dollars, and the producers of these films are putting hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars on the table to do productions in our province. And if we can't process those applications in a timely fashion, people will go elsewhere. And the letters I tabled today speak to that. They speak to a specific incident and a film where that is an issue, and the filmmakers will leave. That's what I want to raise with the minister today. Setting out a robust performance or looking at the parameters is one thing, but this isn't a new tax credit. This is a tax credit we've had in place for almost 20 years. We were the first province in the country to have it. And it's been a good thing, so I don't know what's gone wrong at the Department of Finance, but I'd like to ask the minister, will she consider the letter I tabled today and respond without delay and immediately get to work to eliminate these unnecessary delays that are frustrating a very important industry?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker, there are 3 departments involved in working with the cultural industries and the film industry in particular. The Department of Economic Development, the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage, as well as the Department of Finance. We are breaking down the silos between these departments so that we can have the best response to the industry possible. And as I said, we have already identified some of the impediments for this, the processing of these tax credits, and we are diligently working to remove them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Nurses in this province say staffing rules for nursing homes and residential care facilities are dangerously out of date. They know that this affects their ability to provide care for their residents, resulting in unreasonable workloads, and even impacts bed vacancies in long-term care facilities. So my question to the Minister of Health and Wellness: will the minister sit down with representatives for the nurses and fix the problem before it turns into a crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had the honour with the Premier today to actually meet with and address the nurses in Truro at their AGM, Mr. Speaker. We were well received, and I have to say there was a lot of discussion between the nurses, the union, and the Premier and I, and we're going to move forward as we continue to do, as we've done in the last 4 years with partners, Mr. Speaker. And our partners are the unions in this province, Mr. Speaker. They are the nurses in this province, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue to work to ensure that the staffing levels meet the guidelines that are set out across the country, to ensure that patients receive the adequate care they need. And that's the approach we've taken over the last 4 years, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyll on his first supplementary.
There are more than 2,400 seniors waiting to be placed in a long-term care facility today, Mr. Speaker. Janet Hazelton told reporters that, quote, "We can have all kinds of beds open, but if we don't have nurses to look after the residents, what's the point?" End of quote. Learning that there are vacancies but not enough nurses is cold comfort to those 2,400 seniors waiting 2,400 seniors waiting for placement. My question to the minister is, how many bed vacancies have been left unfilled because the government has failed to address the, quote, dangerously out-of-date staffing rules for nurses?
Honourable the Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that is just simply not true, what the member opposite is talking about. Back in 2011, we did a staffing review, to see what levels were sufficient in long-term care facilities, Mr. Speaker. Last year alone, we increased the budget of over $2 million, which increased over 34 positions across facilities in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. It's one thing that we are proud about doing, is ensuring that we work with our partners, with the unions, those who represent the important work that nurses do in the province, Mr. Speaker. I think our track record is indicated much better than the track record of what the former government has had, Mr. Speaker. We're working with them to solve issues in healthcare, not working against them.
The honourable member for Argyll on his final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The seniors have worked long and hard, contributed to our economy and to our province our whole lives. They deserve to be treated with the utmost respect. This government needs to get their ducks in a row when it comes from addressing the needs of seniors. When they halted bed construction, they have left beds remain empty while 2,412 seniors wait. The CBC article states the government has said that they're willing to talk about possible changes. I will table that. And the seniors deserve a better commitment, and so do the nurses, Mr. Speaker. Will the government update policies for long-term care facilities in this session so that nurses and seniors have a fair opportunity to receive the proper care?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I believe actions speak louder than words, Mr. Speaker. And the actions that we have taken over the last 4 years to support seniors in this province, Mr. Speaker, talks for themselves. Seniors know that we reduced taxes that they pay in this province, Mr. Speaker. More low-income Nova Scotians, senior Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, pay no income tax here in this province. Under the Conservatives, they felt it was okay to charge seniors income tax, Mr. Speaker. Under the NDP government, we respect the commitment that seniors have had to build this economy. That's why we ensure that the loved ones that are left in the communities have more money in their pockets to remain in their homes, Mr. Speaker. We reduce the requirements when we use and require the seniors to pay in a long-term care facility, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad of the work that we've done over the last 4 years, and our track record will show that were committed to seniors, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the 10 years under Conservative government, Mr. Speaker, they used to strip every last dime from seniors who entered long-term care. I'm proud of our record.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, the delivery of health care in a timely manner requires planning. It requires the development of targets. It requires a plan to meet the targets, and it requires monitoring. Mr. Speaker, it also requires accountability to the people of Nova Scotia for results. Since 2004, Nova Scotia has been the beneficiary of over $159 million from the federal government in the form of Wait Time Reduction Fund, a fund established to augment provincial efforts in addressing wait times in our healthcare system. Could the Premier please indicate how the NDP government has spent the over $34 million his NDP government has received since assuming office addressing wait times?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we have taken a whole host of measures to ensure that the people in Nova Scotia are receiving better care sooner. We now have one of the best waiting lists on cardiac surgery in the country.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a very interesting response. During estimates, I asked the Minister of Health and Wellness to table a list, one simple list of what they spent the Wait Times Reduction Fund on in 2012-13 and what they plan to spend the money on this fiscal year. Here, in part, is the response received. The Federal Wait Times Reduction Fund is a federal transfer that goes directly to general revenue. It is not based on any specific funding. Could the Minister of Health and Wellness please explain why the Wait Time Reduction Fund goes directly to general revenue?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, the budget for health care that we just tabled about a month ago, Mr. Speaker, and passed, Mr. Speaker, spends over 40% of the total provincial budget on health care, Mr. Speaker. Over $3.9 billion is spent providing services for Nova Scotians so that they can gain access to the services in a timely manner, Mr. Speaker. We worked hard over the last 4 years to ensure that we reduce wait times. We can always do better, we know that, but I'm proud of the wait times that we've had, some of the guarantees and the guidelines that we've met here in Nova Scotia. I can say, without a doubt, in Nova Scotia, if you're severely ill or sick, you get into the hospital, you get the services you need. Yes, we do need to do some work on the wait time, orthopedic wait time surgeries. We recognize that. We're going to continue to work with our partners, those surgeons within the district health authorities, the district health authorities themselves, to try to bring that wait list down, Mr. Speaker, to a reasonable time. And we're going to continue to work in that manner over the coming years.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, provinces across the country, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Ontario, and Newfoundland have all established wait time reduction plans. They set targets for themselves and they went about achieving them using the Wait Time Reduction Fund to augment their plans. It would appear that this NDP government saw fit to dump the money into general revenue. Whether the fund was used to balance the budget or to bail out Bowater, it would appear the money was not used for what it was intended. Could the minister please explain to the almost 3,000 patients waiting for orthopedic surgery, the 4,000 plus patients waiting for cataract surgery, why the Wait Time Reduction Fund was not used to reduce wait times in this province?
The Honourable the Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't even know where to start with that question. We work hard here in the province to ensure that we provide services for healthcare services for Nova Scotians. When the federal health transfer started, Mr. Speaker, it was supposed to be a 50-50 cost-sharing venture for the provinces and territories. I believe we're just over 20% now, Mr. Speaker, here in the province, and the federal government is backing away from the health accord, which puts more pressure on all the jurisdictions across the country, under all political parties, Mr. Speaker. As ministers of health, we're concerned about the federal government's cutback and their approach to getting out of health care delivery. We need the federal government to be at the table with the health ministers who are Conservatives, health ministers who come from the Saskatchewan Party, from the Liberal Party, and from the NDP. We all talk at the same, on the same level, Mr. Speaker, when we meet as ministers of health for across the country. We need the federal government at the table. We're working hard to make sure that we can keep up our end of the bargain with delivering a health care here in the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker, last week the NDP used a majority government to smother the truth by not allowing the Internal Affairs Committee of this House to review the government's $27 million budget misrepresentation. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Why is this government intent on hiding this information from Nova Scotians?
Minister of Finance. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have had a full airing of this issue at the Public Accounts Committee with the staff from the Department of Finance, as well as with the Auditor General. We have heard from the former Minister of Finance on this, Mr. Speaker. I have spoken on this. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing more to be said on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Preston on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, even the member for Halifax Atlantic said in support of the motion on April 23, 2013, it's extraordinarily important that this House be permitted to do its work. And I'll table that quote out of Hansard. Keeping this information from the Internal Economy Committee and therefore the people of Nova Scotia shows complete disrespect to this House and to the people of this province. My question is to the Premier. If the NDP has nothing to hide with its $27 million cover-up, why does this government vote down the motion and refuse further review?
Order, order. The word cover-up is unparliamentary. I'd ask the honourable member to retract that.
I will retract that. Error.
Thank you. And I make those decisions on that, and I'll do it in due time. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there was no error. Everything that happened exactly as it should. And what amazes me, Mr. Speaker, is that the other night here in the House of Assembly, and I have to say, unfortunately, I was engaged elsewhere, so I wasn't actually able to be here. But I took the time to go back and read the Hansard of the member for Halifax Fairview, the former finance minister, where he went through this issue piece by piece, and he talked about the way in which you go about putting together an almost $9 billion budget, how those lines are determined, when the cutoff dates. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that at the end of that all the members of the House gave the member for Halifax Fairview a standing ovation. Yes. Now, I'll tell you something, Mr. Speaker. He deserves it, and I believe him.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you will be to the Minister of Health and Wellness. Seniors in Cape Breton have been left behind by this NDP government, with more than 2,400 seniors on the waiting list for long-term care and no signs of movement on tendering new beds. It has become quite clear the NDP have forgotten about the seniors who cannot stay in their own homes. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, how many seniors are currently waiting for placement in a long-term care facility, and how many of those are from Cape Breton?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the more important things that people want to ensure that their government's doing is ensure that they have options when they come to receiving care here in Nova Scotia. We know, and I've said this many, many times in the House, government, whoever's in government in the future, are always going to be in the business of providing long-term care. They're going to need to replace them. They're going to need to build new ones. We're committed to that, and any future government has to be committed to that. But one of the things we've seen over the last 10 years or so is a lack of support, I believe, or appropriate support for home care services. When we looked at the long-term care wait list, over 43% of those individuals waiting for a long-term care bed placement have never received community care or home care. And that, I can't understand why. So that's why we invested $22 million last year in addition. We're spending over $190 million a year trying to provide home care services so that people have options. That's what Nova Scotians want, that's what seniors want, and that's what we're going to do, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
The question was, how many need a bed? Mr. Speaker, in February, the Cape Breton Post reported that an average of 140, and I'll repeat that, 140 beds were lost daily in the Cape Breton Health Authority because of long-stay patients waiting to get into nursing homes. And I'll table that article, Mr. Speaker. This is unacceptable. No one, Mr. Speaker, no one in Nova Scotia would agree that the solution to the growing need for long-term care beds is to put those seniors in the hospital. This is causing a delay and taking up critical space in our hospitals. So my question is to the Minister, what will the Minister do to guarantee that the seniors his government has displaced will be moved into long-term care beds and out of the acute care beds?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This issue around long-term care placement is an issue that's not just happening within our borders, Mr. Speaker. I've chaired the national meeting of ministers of health from across the provinces and territories. We all are trying to struggle to ensure that we meet the needs of our seniors. We know the demographic shift, Mr. Speaker, in the coming years, where we're going to have more seniors living in not only our province but across the country. That's why collectively we're looking at how do we best meet those needs of seniors in our jurisdiction. That's why we believe we need a national policy or strategy on senior care, Mr. Speaker. That's why the premiers are talking about it through the Health Innovation Committee, Mr. Speaker. That's why ministers of health are speaking across the country to try to collectively ensure that we're meeting the needs of seniors. We're going to continue to move in that direction. We're going to continue to invest in long-term care facilities. We're going to continue to invest in home care services, Mr. Speaker, so our seniors, those who built our economy, can have options when they get into their elderly years, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the seniors that have built our economy in Cape Breton, it is reported that sometimes they have to wait as long as 3 years to get into a facility. Families are pushing themselves to the brink to provide care for their aged loved ones. And a 3-year wait, Mr. Speaker, is unacceptable. The government must consider the well-being of the generous caregivers in this province when they decide to halt plans for the production of long-term beds. So when will the minister put out a tender for new long-care beds in Cape Breton? Thank you.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. I would like to recognize the Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture on an introduction, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and the members of the House, I'd like to draw your attention to the East Gallery, where today we are joined by Lockport Regional High School teachers. We have teachers and students. We have Mr. Speaker, we have 30 grade 10 and 11 students, 15 from beautiful Lockport and 15 from Quebec, and the exchange students from Quebec. Anne Swinewhite is the teacher, and I ask the House to give a warm welcome. Perfect timing. Thank you.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader to call business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call government bills for second reading?
Government bills for second reading. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 66, the Mariners' Day Act?
Bill number 66, the Mariners' Day Act. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And To the guests in the gallery, I think this is a very appropriate, it's a perfect timing for me to stand today and to give a few remarks. Mr. Speaker, certainly an honor to stand before my colleagues in this House and ask for their support for the Mariners' Day Act. As promised in our government's recent speech from the throne, this will be a special day for families and friends and indeed all Nova Scotians. As Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture, I'm bringing forward a bill that will honor all those fish harvesters who left port in early dawn but never came home. As a fisherman and as a fisherman's son, I'm asking you to join me in assuring the families and those lost souls that they will never be forgotten. Mr. Speaker, we are introducing new legislation which designates the second Sunday in August as Mariners' Day. Mr. Speaker, this act will stand alongside the existing but little-known Seamen's Memorial Day Act. Out of respect, we will keep the legislation and use the same day of observation. Each and every year, we will have a special day to recognize those who contribute to so much to the economy and the economic prosperity of this province and who lost their lives in the process. It will also give Nova Scotians from Yarmouth, Mr. Speaker, from Yarmouth to Cape North, a chance to say thank you to the fishers who currently make their living on the water. I come from Woods Harbor, Shelburne County, Mr. Speaker, the port or the home port of the Miss Alley. We've had our share of fishing tragedies, but you don't have to come from my end of the province to share our sorrow. It's an all too familiar story of many coastal communities and villages that dot Nova Scotia's shoreline. It's an all too familiar event for too many families. This most recent fishing tragedy touched the folks all over Nova Scotia, indeed throughout Canada. Unfortunately, our maritime history bears the names of men and women from all over the province who's lost their life to the sea. Mr. Speaker, the Mariners' Day Act is dedicated to all those lost souls. Mariners' Day will also serve to help promote safety practices within the fishing industry. There is no denying the dangers associated with fishing for a living, but we can enhance awareness of safety within the fishing industry. My department is currently working with Labor and Advanced Education and the Workers' Compensation Board, along with Fisheries Safety Associations of Nova Scotia, to do just that. Families can play a big role in encouraging their loved ones to take greater precautions while at sea, ensuring a crew will return home without suffering an injury or worse. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to support the Mariners' Day Act, and I'm looking forward to the support of my fellow members of the House of Assembly. I also look forward to gathering with Nova Scotians on the second Sunday in August to observe Mariners' Day. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the time. It's certainly a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Would the minister just move, I may have missed it, but I don't think you actually moved second reading. Just move second reading.
Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of Bill 66. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable, the member from Digby, Annapolis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand and speak on Bill 66. It touches a place with me, that's for sure. Yesterday, the government introduced the bill to honor the work and sacrifice of Nova Scotians who make their living at sea. Mr. Speaker, my family has been at the fishing industry in this province for 15 generations, if my grandchildren go, and I believe they will be, because that'll make, I'm the 13th generation. My sons are 14th and my grandchildren are 15th. And when my forefather came here in 1637, he fished these coastal waters with the Mi'kmaq Indians to make a living, and that's where we started. It's a very fitting tribute to the coastal communities of this province, and I thank the minister for bringing this forward, because I believed that it would be very fitting, a great tribute to the coastal communities that built this province, helped build this province. Mr. Speaker, this is an important bill, one which recognizes the importance of Nova Scotia fisheries and the people who work in this industry. We know the contribution fishers make to our economy, but also contributions it's made to the entire province of our coastal communities. In fact, the most coastal communities in Nova Scotia are still dependent on the fishery in one form or another. Coastal communities in Nova Scotia was built by the fishery and will always be here in one form or another. Mr. Speaker, 2/3 of this planet is water, salt water. And if you put the fresh with it, maybe you're leaving a little bit more than 2/3. There'll always be a fishery somewhere of some form. If one fishery goes down, there'll be another fishery take its place. We've experienced that over the past 100 years especially this last 50 years. That's changed, and when one species goes down, another species will come along. So there'll always be a fishery on this earth. And I want to tell you here today, if something happens that there isn't a fishery on this earth, and over 2/3 of it being water, I would be worrying on the other 1/3 of the land that we're living on. I would truly be worried about that one. So, Mr. Speaker, there's always going to be a fishery, and there's always going to be tragedies. Fishery is a very dangerous profession and something we're all very well aware of. My family alone, I've lost an uncle and a brother-in-law in the past 60 years that I know of in my family, so to the sea. So, and I don't know how many others in the community and surrounding communities that I've seen go to the sea from tragedies it's a hard thing to accept, but you accept it. And I'll tell you why you accept it. Because I was born practically in a boat. The Minister of Fisheries can probably attest to this. You don't know too much difference until you get to Halifax here, maybe, to see what else is going on. But you're born in the fishery on the coastal waters. And you continue doing what's been done to provide for your family, to provide for the people that you catch these fish for. These fish aren't just to make your own living. These fish are to feed millions and millions and millions of other people on this planet. One of the healthiest foods you could ever put into your body. And that's what fishermen do. Fishermen have always done that and always will do that as long as those fish are there. And fishermen will also be sacrificed to the sea. We can look at all the safety we want to look at. The minister spoke of this, of safety things to do. But I'm telling you, when you're out on the ocean in a 40 or 50-foot boat, 60-foot boat, the boats we use in our coastal waters, you are nothing but a grain of sand in the middle of the Sierra Desert. That's what you are. And you are to whatever the sea wants to do to you, the sea will do to you. Many fishermen, 99%, 95% of fishermen, do not know how to swim. And people think they're crazy. I've often said to myself, I could swim the length of this building if I had to probably get back aboard of a boat. But if your boat, your little grain of sand out there in the middle of the ocean goes out from under you, I always ask the question of where are you going to swim to? That's what you got to ask yourself. If you're real lucky and you're real tough with a 3 or 4 degree temperature, you'll live a few minutes, if you're lucky. And where you're going to swim to, I don't know. So the quicker you go, probably the better when you go over the side. They've figured out gear to work with, or try to figure out gear to work with for fishermen out there. They put the floater suits on, and these floater suits are similar to having a suit on the moon. Similar, without the heavy boots. Maybe the heavy boots would work good too with it, then you really wouldn't move on deck too much. But that's what you have to survive in. If you go over the side, you can survive a few more hours. Maybe, possibly, somebody will fly over and maybe find you in the few hours you have in this suit. But you can't work in this suit. It's impossible. The work you have to do out there of handling gear all day, the small floating devices that you can put on that'll inflate when you go over the side may get you back if you're lucky, if there's someone aboard the boat that knows you went over to get back to get you aboard. Little things like that may help. But to find gear and find something to make you survive out there, there's little things you can do. But the thing is, you are there, and the sea will do what it wants to you. You are to the mercy of the sea, whatever that sea do. I've seen it rough. I've told that story in this house before, of waves higher in this building coming at you. And I can imagine what the Miss Allie went through that night. Even if those boys did get in that life raft that's supposed to save you, at 70 to 100 miles an hour, I don't think they found that raft yet. That raft would be similar to blowing up a balloon, throwing it out on the ocean in a 70-mile, 80-mile breeze of wind. Now you go look for that balloon and find it. If you come across it, you'll be a very, very lucky pilot in the air. That raft has never been found yet. So there goes your life raft. I mean, at times it can save you, but that night with the Miss Allie, it's possible some could be in that raft. But I doubt it, because one sea took that boat. Just like that. That boat flipped in the air, down on its top, broke the top all off it, and I imagine them boys just went out through her everywhere. So you can do all you want to try to gear up things to be safe at sea, and some things you will gear up to be a bit safe. But when the sea wants to take you out there, it will take you. So with that, I won't speak anymore. A Mariner's Day is a very fitting thing for this province. And the next time you eat a fish, a nice fresh fish, maybe you haven't got to wait till the second Sunday of August. Maybe you could take that moment when you eat that piece of fish to think of where that came from. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now recognize the honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a hard act to follow, as it always happens in here. The member for Digby-Annapolis, with speeches like that, I wish he'd be around for another 4 years at least, if not a bunch more, but I know he's going to go do something that is in his heart, which of course is to do some fishing, some whale watching, and spend time with the thing that's most important to him, and you heard it there in his speech, was his family. And of course, you know, if this is my last opportunity to say it to you, to the member of Digby-Annapolis, is thank you for the memories, thank you for the friendship. You're there for your community, and I'm so proud of having the opportunity to have known you and to have known the stories and the stuff that you impart upon us. It's going to be a loss for us. But I hope to be maybe spending some time down and doing some whale watching with you and getting down and spending that time. But, you know, it's always a hard act to follow in this house when the member gets up before me. But one that I... you know, you know, every once in a while we have the opportunity to pass along and support a bill as it's being presented without too much negativity, which, you know, this House tends to be full of negativity at times, and sometimes it's really neat to see how everything sort of comes together and we can talk about, you know, our own experiences and our own feelings when it comes to something as the loss at sea. I come from a fishing village. My great-grandfather was a master mariner on the Grand Banks off of Newfoundland, went fishing for swordfish and other fish for many years. My father is a scallop fisherman, just recently retired after 40 years. And I'm so thankful that my father made it through that ordeal, and I don't have to say that I lost family to the sea. Yet, you know, every year we hear of more, and even seems we almost get complacent. Every year there might be no one that we lose, and other years we have, you know, we're hit even harder. You know, this year in my constituency and my neighboring constituency of Shelburne, we've lost 6. Michael Doucette, 21 years old. You know, just a young guy. Catlin Nickerson, Stephen Cole, Nick Nickerson, Billy Jack Hatfield, Joel Hopkins, and Tyson Townsend. You know, ranging in age from, what, 21 to 33, somewhere around 34. All young with families, just getting their starts in life. And we have to face the fact that they're no longer with our families. I first got hit with losing a friend to the sea probably in 1998. I'd been working at, just before becoming an executive assistant to Neil LeBlanc, I was working at a boat building facility in southwest Nova Scotia, in Dion Fisheries. And there was a young kid there, Gilles LeBlanc, again, early 20s. And like it was within a year of that. I think I had been started working here by that time, but lost him off the back of the boat, just completely gone. They went back and looked for him, but they really couldn't find him. Another, you know, an individual just lost far too early in his life. I lost an uncle on my wife's side, Louis D'Entremont. Actually, his wife spoke at the Day of Mourning just the other day in Lunenburg. Louis seining fell over to the backside of the boat and perished. You know, luckily they recovered him, so we did have, you know, some closure to that for the family. But many times when it happens to many of the fishermen, we never do have the opportunity to bid our farewells or our goodbyes, and that's sort of I think the point of a day of mourning, or an opportunity to stand before what you feel is a sacred place, whether it's a monument, whether it's just at the end of the wharf and saying goodbye. You know, at least there's a day where everybody can sort of grab each other's hands and be able to mourn together and say thank you for the memories that we do have, but at the same time to, I guess, you know, be sad a little bit together too, because that's a part of the healing process in our communities. We all come from a community that have made the decision to be fishermen. I mean, you don't have to be a fisherman. You know, you can become an engineer. You can become a Baptist minister. You can become a doctor. You can become anything you want. But when the call of the sea hits someone, they become fishermen. And there's hundreds of people in our communities that have made that decision. And every day that they go out, they know that something stupid can happen. A lot of times it's what it is. I mean, for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to go lobster fishing, you know, when you're sending out that trawl and the trawl's starting to go and you're on your 10th pot, there's a lot of weight starting to pull on that set of ropes. You get caught around your leg, you're gone. That's how quick it can happen. You can fall off the back of the boat. I mean, Michael, the stories are he went outside for a few moments and was never seen again. You know, they can happen that quick. The wrong roll of a boat, the wrong bump, it just can happen so quickly that, you know, sometimes the rest of the crew don't realize it for a few minutes, even up to an hour. And by the time you turn a boat around and go look, that speck of sand in the middle of the Sahara is quite realistic of trying to find that. I remember a few years ago, taken a bit of a trip to Gloucester and to see the Lost at Sea monuments there. If you ever had the opportunity, it's something to see. And to see the name of my my wife's great-grandfather, who was lost on a boat. And, you know, so all our families, I think it's you know, that's kind of one of the things that bind us, that there's an opportunity to say, you know, listen, I lost a loved one as well. Mr. Speaker, you know, there's a couple of lovely monuments that we have in the municipality of Argyll. One in West Pubnico, one in East Pubnico, which of course people that have drowned. But if you look at the names, a lot of them are very young people that were out fishing at the time and were lost in storms or any other. And I remember one of the first times that I remember not necessarily knowing who the fishermen were, but listening to the VHF. And I don't remember, maybe the minister remembers this, you know, probably back in the late 70s, if not early 80s. And there's a gate that you sail through as you're heading from Wedgeport to the Tuscot Islands. And if you miss the gate, there's a reef there that you get hooked up on. And I remember listening to the VHF, you know, and sitting there with my dad, you know, like I said, who's a fisherman, and just he was just listening to ashen, and you could tell he was visibly upset. You know, if anybody knows my dad, he doesn't really get upset, but you know, sitting there and listening to it. And I remember a few days later going down to the beach and combing along and finding pieces of the boat that actually had, you know, broken up on that reef. But I can't remember the name and how many, you know, how many were lost on that one. But it was like, yeah, I think it might be Soldier's Whip or something like that. But you know, there was three gentlemen that had lost their lives on that one as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank the minister for bringing this one forward. I look forward to supporting this one as we continue through the process of this legislature, and look forward to maybe the second Sunday in August to stand with the minister and stand with my friends here in the legislature to celebrate the lives of those loved ones who were lost at sea. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm particularly pleased today to rise in support of this bill, Bill 66, the Mariners' Day. And I'm going to reflect a little bit on all the reasons why, but I want to start with saying how proud I am to be part of a government, but more importantly, a colleague of the Minister of Fisheries, who not only is doing such a great job, but is also a fisherman by his own rights. And to bring this bill forward at this point, I'm very proud of that, and I think we should acknowledge that. I'm thankful to hear the members opposite talking about why it's important to them, in particular the member for Digby and the very, very important and thoughtful way that he brings his true experience to this House. You can feel it in the emotion when he talks about anything related to this issue. It's heartfelt, it's deep-rooted, and it's very much appreciated for all members. I think I can speak on behalf of all members to when he speaks, and I want to thank him for that. And I too will miss him. Mr. Speaker, the importance of the fisheries in Nova Scotia is not new. The importance of the fisheries in Nova Scotia have been here for generations, as the member from Digby spoke of. The importance to our society and the fabric of what makes up Nova Scotia and what has created Nova Scotia. Not only Nova Scotia as we see it on a global level, but on a very local level. The communities that have grown up in and around the fishing industry have close-knit ties to each other. They still have those values that, you know, we're not seeing in every community, particularly the larger metropolises in Nova Scotia, that we wish our young ones, my boys, and other Nova Scotian families, that they're missing out on that experience that helps shape Nova Scotia and also helped shape me. I can't say that I'm from a long line of 15 generations, but I too, you've heard me speak about my growing up in Shelburne. I grew up on Sandy Point Road, on the harbor of the Shelburne Harbor. I grew up knowing that my family, my dad's family, is from a long line of fishermen. My dad grew up in a home of 9 children, 2 of which were girls. The rest were all fishermen. My grandfather was a fisherman, a lobster fisherman, and the experience that I had growing up in that is very much a part of me. You know, when I stand in my place here and talk, sometimes we have to deliver, you know, messages. Sometimes we speak on things that we learn about, but I lived that, and I'm very proud of that experience, and I think that's what makes me truly Nova Scotian. My dad was the youngest of 7 fishermen and his dad, and he's the only one that didn't fish for a living. And I'm sharing this experience. I'm going to give you a little insight into it so that people have a little bit more insight into the real, true grit and commitment and drive and experience of our Nova Scotian fishing families, and why we need to honor them, why we need the rest of Nova Scotians to take notice of what they're contributing to our society. So my dad being the youngest, he went on and to further his education a bit, but he learned the fishing. He learned it, he lived in it. He had a license, he had a lobster license, but he didn't fish for a living. But he fished beside his brothers, he fished beside his uncles, he fished beside his dad. And he too had the passion for going on the water. And the call to the water is very real. It's been there, and it continues to be there for those involved in the fishing industry. My early memories are of, and these are quite early, these are the ones I think that I from a very early age, there's some things that when you're really young, you don't remember it all. But I remember being a tiny little girl going down into West Green Harbor at on the fishing wharfs. In fact, I remember it because it was actually kind of scary at times. It was so early and it was just coming light, so it was that eerie time for a little girl. But my dad wanted us to be near him, and we'd go and I would be around all the men, and it was predominantly a men's environment, although you'd see women baiting, women filling the traps, women getting their men ready and their crews ready, and there was very much a family environment, and it continues to be. But I remember going to the wharf when they were getting their boats ready, and you could see the weathered, worn faces of being on the ocean. You could hear the gruffness in their voice of the salt air affecting, because they'd spend all day there. They would be there from before light to well after dark. And I remember the small boat that my dad had by comparison to some of the bigger ones who were out there, you know, with a full load of traps or nets for whatever it was they were fishing. And I remember the trips out to Blue Island. And for me, as the member for Digby spoke of, it felt like I was on the other side of the world. Because out on the ocean, there's nothing to see, to connect to until we saw, so we'd be out there in this small boat and we'd see the porpoises and whales going under my dad's boat as we were going to check the traps until we saw Blue Island. And Blue Island was like, oh, okay, we got there. and you know, we were blessed that each time we went out, we came back home safely and such. But I can't say that was always the case for many of my family. My grandmother kept a journal, in fact, of all the lost men and women of their family, particularly men. And it was something that when I would go to my grandparents' home, my grandfather and his mates would be at the table after a long season, and that's when they'd start playing cards. They'd sit beside the kettle on the stove. My nanny would always make molasses cookies for them for all their trips out on the sea, but also for us. She always made sure there was enough for us. But I remember them sitting around the table talking about all their trips, talking about the big catches, the little catches, and playing cards, and the knuckle slamming of the cards on the table because they were so strong and worn, and it didn't faze them a bit. Again, as a little girl, that big slam on the table when they were really telling their stories. And I'm sharing that with you because I heard those stories. I heard those stories of that sacrifice and that commitment and that drive and that call. I remember as well, being a little girl, when my dad learned all these, that my dad would knit the bait bags. He'd sit in our living room with it tied onto the door handle. And he'd have that little, I don't know, member from Digby could tell me what that little needle was. Thank you. Was it just a needle? A fin needle that he would stitch these bags, these bait bags. And then as well, those were the days when you made your pots from scratch. You'd go out, I remember going out with my dad and collecting the alders, and you get the real bendy ones. Dad would have a jig in the basement. We still had a coal furnace. We had a coal furnace where Dad would shovel the coal into it, so it was a good room to dry that out. But after he got it in the jig, and he'd create these pots. And then, of course, I certainly would remember the many feeds of lobster that would come home. We had the benefit of them coming home to the table and enjoying them. But in fact, this day and age now, when lobster comes to my table, it's like going home. It's one of those foods that it just reminds me of all that I experienced as a young person, and it has created who I am. My dad, his brothers, my grandfather, you know, that they knew the element of risk that it was involved in fishing. They knew it, and generations before knew it, and generations after that, yet they still continue to participate in the fishing industry. They continued to go on the sea. It was in their blood. It continues, and it's noble, and it's honorable, and it deserves recognition and celebration in our communities. It is a call to the sea. It's a call that folks get, similar to, I think, our military. You're called to serve and protect. Our clergy are called to serve God. I'd be remiss if I didn't say a long-haul truck driver is called to the open road. It's something that they are of which I know, that they're drawn to. I was drawn certainly to the community of, yes, teachers would be another one as well, and actors, okay, well, there's lots. But I believe very much that I was drawn to the community of Eastern Passage for the similarities that it offered to what I knew to be a loving and connected community, similar to what I grew up in Sandy Point along the water with the fishing families. You know, so much to the point that Shelburne Harbour has McNutt's Island, Cole Harbour Eastern Passage has McNabb's Island, and just outside the main city, the main town is Shelburne, it's just outside. And I don't think that was by happenstance. I think that was something that was part of me. When you visit Eastern Passage, I know I speak a lot about that here in our community, and as the MLA for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, it's very much, Eastern Passage is very much still a fishing community. It has a number of other elements to it as well as it grows, but the fishing industry and the commitment and the contribution that they provide to our community and to the economy of Nova Scotia and to society of Nova Scotia is very real and still very vibrant. You'll still go down, you can go down to Fisherman's Cove and Fisherman's Cove, let's start there. Fisherman's Cove, although it's on the peninsula where the government wharf is, Fisherman's Cove was named to honor the fishing industry, the fishing men and women of that community and the subsequent industries related to it. And because the community respects and values that. But you can still go there and you'll see the fishermen getting their boats ready, getting their traps ready and their nets and their bait and their crew ready to go out on the ocean. We as a community as well continue to honor them and wish them safe journeys by every year. We have a long-standing community festival, the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Summer Carnival, of which one evening is dedicated to the blessing of the fleet. We will take our local clergy from all denominations and bless the fleet and wish them a safe year, safe journeys. And so this is important to the communities that I represent. In 2010, a lot of hardworking community members. It was a culmination of 2 or 3 years of hard work where we created the Fisherman's Monument, the Fisherman's Memorial Monument on McCormick's Beach, adjacent to Fisherman's Cove, which certainly is fitting. And I'm thankful that we had a community that wanted to acknowledge and commemorate and honor and offer a place of reflection and for our fishing families. Mr. Speaker, growing up in Sandy Point and living in Eastern Passage on a daily basis, we see the multitude of boats and ships that come and go out of the harbor. And by the mere very definition of a mariner is those who navigate the sea or assist in navigating the sea. Really, this day could be attributed to the celebration of so many industries in Nova Scotia. But in Sandy Point in particular, while I'm talking about a monument, I remember as a teenager living in Sandy Point, I babysat, and they were actually relatives of mine, and some of the members here may know them. And if you recall, a lost boat by the name of Johnny and Sisters. Johnny and Davy Thorburn were the captains. Johnny Thorburn had him and his son on it, and a number of other local crew members, and that was lost at sea. And then the Shelburne, the community there created the monument down on the harbor front in the town of Shelburne in recognition of that. So people I know people in Nova Scotia want these opportunities, and sometimes it takes a little more emphasis from leaders in their communities, like their government, like their MLAs, like their local community officials, to lead the drive on celebrations and events that recognize that. But I think this legislation, this particular day in August, will help drive that and give them just more opportunities maybe to group work together to create a further celebration beyond just that single day. But I think, particularly in a constituency like mine that is very much a community that has members of our military living in it, that spend their entire naval careers on the sea, navigating the sea. I see the transportation and cargo ships coming in and out of the ports in Eastern Passage, navigating the sea, or being a part of helping to navigate that. The cruise lines, the research vessels that are going in and out, they're all part of industries that involve that risk of being out on the ocean. And then there are many, many more. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians who spend their time on the sea should be honored. They are who we were yesterday, they are who we are today, and they are who we will be tomorrow. As Nova Scotia turns the corner towards the biggest shipbuilding contract in our history, they can do so with pride, and they can do so with the expertise and the connection to the sea. The shipbuilders that will be building those crafts, they're doing it because their family members, their friends, their neighbors will be on those ships. And those shipbuilders are proud to build those ships to protect and serve not only their country, but their community members. So we hope that, and I speak to that because when you think of Mariners' Day and you think of our fishermen and any other Nova Scotian that spends time on the sea to make a living. We want and need them to be safe. We want and need them to return home, and I believe very much that the men and women that will build those ships for our military service personnel will do so with care, and their hearts and their souls will be in it because they're Nova Scotian, because they grew up in a family that came from the roots, the very core roots of being on the ocean, like our fishing families. And the member for Digby spoke as well, and I think the member for Argyle spoke as well, that, you know, not all of them will return home. We hope they do. We hope and pray every time any of our men and women go out on the sea for whatever reason that they'll return home, that there will be no more lost souls like the Miss Alley crew, which my heart and prayer go out to those families that have most recently lost their loved ones in that community. And I know that while we hope that we will have no more lost souls, Mother Nature may have another plan, and as the member from Digby spoke of, that things will happen, and we may have to be here another day talking about another lost soul, and I hope not, but it is the risk that they take when they go on the ocean. So, Mr. Speaker, at this point, I just want to say that I'm so very proud to be supporting this bill, coming from a long line of seafaring and fishing family, and as an MLA for a constituency who still honor and respect and support those in that industry. And I still reflect, you know, I have a little list here, and I was thinking very quickly of the names of fishing families in the Eastern Passage area that every time I think of them, and I know that what they do, the Noggles, the Holmes, the Silvers, the Purdy's, the Edwards, the Horns, and the Eddies, and then I'm living in and working for families that are so close to what I grew up with. Names in Sandy Point in the Shelburne area, like the Townsends, the Hemyans, and the minister would know most of these, the Goodicks, the Holmes, the Butlers, the Bellevos, the Nickersons, the Langels, the Thorburns. I'm sure the member from Digby and Argyle would the Goodwins. I'd be remiss if I didn't say the Scotts. That's my maiden name. When I hear those names, I instantly get transported back to those family roots. And that's an experience that you know, as a mom raising kids today, it's sometimes hard to find those things that they will connect to when they're young, because their lives are very different. But Nova Scotia has a long and rich history of that, and will have a long and bright future of seagoing mariners and the fishing industry. And I think that this bill is an indication that their government respects them, their government honors them, their government values them for who they are and what they do. And I'm very proud to support Bill number 66, Mariners' Day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise and speak to Bill number 66, and obviously in support. I think, simply put, in hearing some of the earlier speeches, especially the member from Digby Annapolis' talk of 15 generations, I think a bill like this is probably easily said to be long overdue. So I want to congratulate the minister, and unfortunately it comes after such a tragedy of Miss Alley, but I think if we look back and we recount all the stories and the proud history of the fishing industry in Nova Scotia, it is definitely one that is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill that is close to my heart. I know I'm the MLA of Dartmouth North, but in the late 70s, early 80s, my father happened to be the first mate on my Uncle Otis's scallop dragger out of Riverport. And as a young boy growing up, all you knew is that Dad was out to sea for 13 days, and you hoped that he made it home, and you knew that he was only going to be home for 7, and then he would venture back out again. So you live with the idea of your mom taking care of you, and when Dad came home, you made most of your time in those 7 days that he was in. And something, Mr. Speaker, that really struck home to me to really understand about some of the stories that he would talk about, the big waves, the amount of species that they would drag up in some of these nets in the nighttime. My father, I had the opportunity as a young boy, my brother and I, to go to Riverport to see exactly the situation that my father was dealing with. We visited the boat, and I remember, as the member from Digby Annapolis said, 95% of fishers can't swim. Well, I can't swim, Mr. Speaker, and I remember just stepping over the edge onto the boat. I was nervous enough. But one of the things that struck home to me was the fact of the close quarters in those boats. So, you know, some of these fishers are out all night. They're bringing in the nets, they're shucking the scallops, and when they lay their heads down, and the accommodations are incredibly small and cramped, and you can imagine the amount of wear and tear it puts on a man's body, not just working the decks, but you know, trying to get a good night's rest so they can go out and be productive and efficient the next day. And it always struck home, and I had an opportunity in 2007 to go out on opening day of lobster season with my uncle Eugene and his first mate Lionel John, who had been lifelong fishers in the Westover Peggy's Cove area. And I remember my uncle saying, you know, that he was getting older and he needed a young man, a young strong man to go out and help. And you know, that day began 5 o'clock in the morning. That was my arrival time. They were up at 3 preparing and loading the traps on the boat. And I always remember as a young person seeing him when he was in sea, going into the city with the big 4x4 truck. And when he ventured back home to Westover, because we used to travel down on the weekends, I remember seeing the big load of groceries in the back of that truck. And I always used to think, well, fishers eat a lot, and couldn't understand why. But that day, Mr. Speaker, when I went out, you know, the first haul that we went out, we unloaded, I believe it was 150 traps. And they had me up in the back of the boat, and I was loading them out to another guy. And as we sailed in, that's when we started to eat. And I realized within a short period of time of being on the ocean why those men needed to eat, because it's very, very difficult, hard work. And I had an appreciation for that. And I also remember, Mr. Speaker, at the recognition of the amount of knowledge that these fishers have, be it young or those that have fished for generations. You know, my uncle would steer the boat, and Lionel John would tell the other deckhands when to drop the traps and where to drop the traps. And they had this whole ocean mapped out. And as you can imagine, on opening day of lobster season, all the boats are rushing out to get to their spots, to get to the best catch. But as I mentioned, my uncle and his first mate, Lionel John, had been fishers for years, and they knew the spot. And I remember starting out and watching all the boats, and you get past everybody, and everybody was dropping the traps, and we just kept going. And I was like, when are we going to drop the traps? Don't worry, we know where to drop the traps. And of course they did. For many years they fished. They knew. I also can say, Mr. Speaker, that you know, when I think of this, you know, a number of years ago we had a tragedy around the Peggy's Cove area, the Swiss Air crash. And I remember working in Halifax at the time, and I got home late that evening, and I put on the news first thing, and I got a call from Westover, from my folks. And they said, "Did you see the news?" And I said, "Yeah." And I know at the time they were talking to St. Margaret's Bay, and I was watching the news, and I just instinctively said to my folks, that's happening over Peggy's Cove right now. And my uncle Eugene and Lionel John, first mate, you know, they were the representatives of the local Coast Guard. And they were the first on the scene at the crash of the Swiss Air. And I still, today, I don't think they've really recovered from some of the things and the scenes that they had to see. So it's not just the experience on the open sea and the success of fishing and those struggles and dealing with Mother Nature, but in those local communities when there's a tragedy, as was with the Miss Alley, communities really came together and they ventured out. They weren't leaving it up to nobody because that was their family. So that's always struck a chord with me, and you know, the benefit of having somebody give you that opportunity, I still think back how proud I am to say that I actually experienced an opening day of lobster season. When I think of this bill, Mr. Speaker, I think about the amount of pride, not just here in Nova Scotia, and the member from Eastern Passage talked about grit. And, I think if a number of us, especially the Cape Breton MLAs, think back, years ago, if you went to school with a lobster sandwich, you were looked down upon. You were from a poor family. And now, subsequent to that, we talk about peanut butter and jam sandwiches. But you think of the pride and how far we've come as an industry, and we have a great opportunity as MLAs to travel the world, and one of the things that people talk about from all around the world is the fishing industry here in Nova Scotia, the crab fishery, the lobster industry. Yes, I believe it's an introduction.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw members' attention to the East Gallery, where we have some special guests from La Belle Province. They're from the Seminar Saint-Joseph, and we have 39 students, and we also have their tour guides are Thelma Cochran, Alexander Thibodeau, Mario Lassard, and Anne-Marie Demure. So I wish all members of the House to give them a warm welcome and raise, please.
Thank you, and we welcome all visitors to our house, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day. I want to now go back to thank the Honourable Member for Dartmouth North for allowing that introduction, and I now recognize the Honourable Member from Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amount of benefits that this province has seen from the fishing industry solely lies on those individuals that venture out throughout the year to put meals on our tables, not just here locally, put tax dollars in the coffers of the government, but feed people worldwide. I mean, it's just a recognition of that. And, my brother recently married into a West Indian family from Ontario, and when I visited them, the first thing they say is, we love Nova Scotia. The second thing they say is, we love the seafood in Nova Scotia. And when they come here, that's what they set out to do. Venture to all those little coastal communities. And speaking of the coastal communities, if you think, we're surrounded by water. As a member of Digby Annapolis said, 2/3 of the world is surrounded by water. I guess when you're young, we never ventured outside the province. We always traveled within the province. And I remember going to a number of communities over the year and travel down to Cape Breton or down through Yarmouth and the South Shore and the Eastern Shore. And as a young person, you don't realize, a lot of things, or you don't remember a lot of things. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, as I grew in age and now as an MLA, and you travel the province, you remember back those certain communities. And we have some of the most beautiful coastal communities. And I can tell you one thing, if you really want to experience those communities, the fishing communities, roll down your windows when you drive through those coastal communities and you smell that salt air. And if you grew up with that, I'll tell you, it's home. Absolutely, the member from Digby Annapolis mentions the lobster bait. There's just something to be said. But what strikes me too, Mr. Speaker, is that each and every one of these communities, it's that sense of pride that they have. And it is like no other, the member from Digby Annapolis, again, I have to keep going back to him. He mentions, here in Halifax, we don't necessarily get to see the depth of pride, the depth of closeness, the connection, that everybody is family. You know your neighbors. And we really miss out on that here in Metro. There is that disconnect. But dotted throughout Nova Scotia and our coastal communities, we have that. I still like to think we have that open door policy. that I grew up with in the Westover area and Peggy's Cove area, that when someone was broken down on the side of the road or a tourist was coming through, you know, your grandmother's door was open. You know, oftentimes through Peggy's Cove, we had the tour buses. And as a young person, I'd go down to church on the weekend. I'd have meals with my family, but we always used to go out and sell the seashells that my uncles would bring in, and we'd go down to the wharf and we'd go fishing on the wharf. And I don't think we take enough pride in it, or that we talk enough about it. And I think Bill 66, what Bill 66 does is it says we not only support those who continue to go out, continue to give back of themselves to this province and to the promotion of this province, to our economy, you know, and obviously along with celebrating those lives that have been lost. Mr. Speaker, the member from Digby, Annapolis has spoken a number of times about his stories fishing on the Grand Banks and George's Bank. The fact that he mentioned the speck of sand on the Sahara Desert. And I'll tell you, one of the things that hit home to me when I went out on opening day in 2007 was the fact that when you're out there, it's both peaceful, you become awestruck because you venture out, and it's like it's a whole different world. And the only thing you know is when you start seeing landmarks as you're venturing in, that you're home. And what do you come home to? You come home to communities that are loving, that are caring, that are hardworking, and that's all they know. And I think this bill is a celebration of not only those that lost lives, but those that, again, continue to give of themselves each day to give back to this province, to our families, and to families abroad. Mr. Speaker, as we know, if you watch some of the TV, we're even glamorizing in some of the reality shows the men that take the sea, that you know, do the crab fishing, the lobster fishing. It really gives the public a close eye, a close glimpse of what some of these individuals really deal with. And growing up, I always used to say, you know, every job has its difficulty. But to get a real appreciation of what an individual is going through, you have to experience it. You have to get out there. And it's not merely by flicking a channel and seeing it, but I'll tell you, when you experience that salt water coming onto your skin, it's cold. When you're out there and you're working and you see the challenges slipping around the boat, and I tell you, Mr. Speaker, when I went, I had a pack of crackers, and I was told, you're going to get seasick, so take that pack of crackers with you. These are stories that you're going to hear today, in the past, and in future. But I'm pleased today to participate, to support the minister in this venture. And again, I would simply say that it is long overdue, but there's no better time than now. So congratulations, and I fully support this bill.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voulais premièrement dire un beau jour à nos amis du Québec qui sont venus pour nous visiter ici à l'Assemblée. Pendant que ce n'est pas souvent qu'on a des députés qui vont se prononcer en français ici, je suis fier de dire que nous avons plusieurs les 52 députés qui peuvent se prononcer dans leur langue maternelle du français. Et je voulais juste leur laisser savoir que le projet de loi que nous sommes en train de débattre en moment, c'est un projet de loi qui a à faire avec nommer une nouvelle journée de fête ici en Nouvelle-Écosse. Ce sera une journée de fête pour les pêcheurs de la Nouvelle-Écosse, et spécialement pour tous ceux qui ont perdu leur vie sur la mer dans notre province. Alors, c'est ça le débat qui prend place maintenant, et je suis content que vous êtes venus à l'Assemblée pour nous visiter pendant votre séjour ici en Nouvelle-Écosse. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure as the fisheries critic for the official opposition to extend my support as well to Bill 66. I thought it most appropriate to allow my colleague and former fisheries critic for our caucus, the member for Digby-Annapolis, to speak first on this, and needless to say, he did not disappoint with his remarks, and especially reflection on his life history on the sea. As has been mentioned, Madam Speaker, this bill and this decision to recognize Mariners' Day does come on the heels of a great tragedy in our province with the loss of the Miss Alley. And while the vessel comes from the riding of the Minister of Fisheries, it's always amazing how tragedies can bring various communities together, because there were 3 vessels out that day from the Shelburne area, and 2 left early before the storm, and the nearest port for them to come home to get out of the storm was in Petit de Gras. And in fact, they tied up at the Petit de Gras Wharf. It's known locally as the Co-op Wharf, because that's where the Ilmadan Fishermen's Co-op used to be, and where I certainly spent a lot of my childhood there. So it was quite ironic that that would be the port that they would be at. I had the opportunity to go down and see the vessels tied up. I believe the crew by that point had gone home. But their vessels stayed there, I believe, almost 2 weeks before they headed back out. And as well, it's the irony as well is that the Miss Alley was out longlining, which is certainly what at the Fishermen's Co-op, where most of the boats would have been doing. They were longliners as well. And most of them at the time before the closure, the moratorium, would have been fishing various species, but certainly catching a halibut was considered a very good thing back then, because it was one of the species that brought the highest amount of money per pound. Madam Speaker, after the loss of the Miss Alley, and speaking with my father and with others, we were reflecting of how fortunate we've been in the communities of Richmond County, that it's been a long time since we had a loss of life. And considering how many men and women have been going out on a daily basis over the years, how fortunate we've been that there hasn't been more tragedy at sea. But we do have in our cemetery in Petit de Gras a memorial to those who've lost their lives at sea, and it'll be interesting to see whether there's a means of tying in this holiday or the special day as well with the memorial that does exist there. It was interesting in hearing some of the stories about growing up and our attachment to the fisheries. I'm proud to say, as I've said in this House before, that I as well grew up in a fishing family. My father, his father, his father, his father, they were all fishermen. In one way or another, fishing was always part of their life. And it was interesting to hear the member for Dartmouth North indicate, I guess, a bit of a personal confession, and let me make mine as well, is like all of my family that were fishermen, I can't swim either. And not one could. And it's simply amazing, because there is a safety element to this bill, and it's striking of how many fishermen can't. I believe the member for Digby-Annapolis said 95%, and I think he's right, because I remember growing up and asking my father, well, why can't you swim? Why couldn't grandfather swim, his father swim? And they would often tell the story of a local fisherman who could swim, and through some reason his boat had capsized just outside of the harbor, and unfortunately he never made it home. And so somehow they had justified it that, why learn how to swim if this great swimmer didn't make it? Why should we be rushing to learn how to swim? Certainly not a good justification, to say the least, but that is just a reality. And one of my earlier memories in growing up, as mentioned by the member for Cold Harbour Eastern Passage, was working on the fishing gear in the basement at home. And I remember as a young boy taking the needle and learning how to run the green thread through the needle so I could pass it off to my father and grandfather, who'd be mending the nets in the basement. whether it be herring nets or mackerel nets, they'd work on them during the winter months. And then when it would come time to work on the long lining gear, one of the first times I learned how to tie a rope was how to tie a snood, which I'm sure the minister and many others here would know what a snood is, but it's the section of rope that the hook is tied onto that then is attached to the long line. So it's not everywhere as you can go and tell people you learn how to tie snoods that they're going to know what you're talking about. But I can say that I still remember in the basement we had the steel bar, and you'd start up with tying it up around there, and by the time you were done you had your snood ready, and you'd keep moving it till you had your bar almost full. And during that time my father and grandfather would be actually punching through the rope to along the long line to put the snoods in. So it was great memories. We had lots of great conversations, and certainly having the chance to hear their stories in that environment was something that I'm very grateful for. And growing up during the summer months, my grandfather and then my father had a salmon trap. We were in fact one of the last commercial salmon fishermen in Nova Scotia. When the federal government came in with the last buyout, I believe around 1986, if I'm not mistaken. And we had a salmon trap which was outside of Samson's Cove, and it was tied onto the breakwater in Little Ants. And the trap would go out, and it was set up like a box with leaders so that the salmon would swim in, and unfortunately for them, could not figure out how to get out. But we would leave shore just before the breakwater. They called it the hauler. And we had the rowboat was up on the shore on these on a ramp made of sticks, basically logs, and so we'd push that and we'd get in. Now, as I said earlier, my father couldn't swim, and I couldn't swim, and we get in that rowboat. It was maybe 14 feet, 12, 14 feet long, and I remember it had a little plug in the back where there was the hole to drain the water out. And so we'd start rowing out, just going around the breakwater, and I'd be, as a young boy, just playing around, and off and on, without paying attention, I'd kick the cork out, the plug. And before we'd noticed, there'd be water all around our feet and everything, and I remember my dad would never panic. He'd just say, "Find the plug." So I'd be searching frantically, knowing neither of us can swim, to get that plug because we're sinking, basically. We're taking on water. And then eventually I'd find that little piece of cork floating somewhere under his feet or underneath the rowboat, underneath everything, and finally find a hole in desperation and plug it. And then my father would say, "Start bailing." So I'd cause the leak. It was up to me to bail us out. But we'd get out to the salmon net, the trap, and for those, I'm sure the Minister of Fisheries and others who've gone out in rowboats to check traps, check nets, basically, once we'd get there, if there was sight of a salmon in there, my dad would stand up, reach over, grab the net, and start pulling at it and hauling it up. Now, in doing so, the rowboat is basically up on its side, and it's basically just a couple of inches outside of the water. And you're thinking to yourself, sitting there, if he moves a bit more, this thing is going to go over completely. Yet it never did. Somehow, in the construction of those rowboats, they would not turn. And yet, so here we were, the two of us, far enough from shore. Neither could swim, but that was just, back then, it wasn't even a consideration. That's just what you did. You went out, you got in a rowboat, you went, checked the net, you came back home. And I did that many a times, and fortunately, there was never any accidents that happened. We were extremely fortunate, because when I see my father now, when he knows that I'm going out in my own pleasure craft in Arishat Harbour, the first question is, do you have your life jacket on? And does everyone have their life jacket on? And it's always this great concern. And I laugh at him and say, well, here I was just a little boy with you in the rowboat going to salmon trap, and you never once considered saying, put a life jacket on. And he said, well, that was a different time. Times have changed, and now you have to be safety-minded. And not only does he ensure that I have my life jacket on, he's also always asking whether I have the clip on my belt for the kill switch for the key, so that if ever something happened to me and that I fell overboard or anything happened, the engine would die, because the kill switch would be pulled. So we've obviously come a long ways on the issue of safety as well. some of my earlier memories, as I mentioned before, of the Fishermen's Co-op, when my dad would have the salmon trap in the summer, when it would come around the month of August, September, he'd go long lining with my uncle to get the rest of his stamps and finish off his year before the winter would come. And I'd go down to the bait shed with them, and I was just a young boy, and I felt that I should be helping out in some way. So at one point I suggested to my father that I should be able to cut bait for him while he was baiting trawls. So I still remember, because of the fact that I wasn't very tall, I had to get a milk crate to stand on the milk crate to be able to get up to the table. And here I was with this knife, about 12 inches long, this chopper, and trying to cut frozen herring and frozen mackerel. And I'm happy to report I still have every finger, and there's no parts of them missing, but some weren't as lucky in that profession. But that was great memories for me of being able to help in cutting bait as a young boy and seeing how the fishery was going. And in growing up, our family, we had this, my father had bought this 22-footer, I believe. The Valerie B is what it was called. And he had decided to put a house on it around the front. Now, whether that's what threw off its stability or not, we're not sure. But never before has a boat been seen that rolled the way that that boat rolled. It could be the calmest day out there, that boat was going to roll. And I remember going out with my father and my grandfather just outside Green Island, which is just a couple of nautical miles outside. And it was a bit rough that day, and that boat was rolling. And my dad said, well, go inside the house. So I decided to go in, and I was sitting. The engine was covered over with a box, and I remember sitting up against the box. And I still remember on the house, the back of the house, just before you got on the deck, there was an adjustable wrench that was hanging there on a nail. And that boat rolled so much that I'd watch that adjustable wrench swing one way, swing back the other way. And I remember sitting there, sick to my stomach, and saying, that wrench is going to make a full 360 turn. Somehow it didn't. But they'd be out on the deck, no life jackets on, taking in the long line, taking in the trawl, dressing the fish, doing all the work, and fortunately, we all made it back home. And our history of fishing is similar to so many other communities in that my father started with a 22-foot boat. From there, he purchased a 32-foot boat, the Mike and Danny. In fact, it was built by Stanley Greenwood. And I remember going down with Dad. Chainsaw, I believe, was his nickname. Legend has it that he would cut out the mold of ships with a chainsaw. So he was a very talented man, and he had an interesting boat shop, I have to say. It was unconventional, I think, is a safe way to say his boat shop, but it was a great boat. My dad always said that was probably his most favorite vessel that he had, a 32-foot fiberglass, and we had decked her over. And so we'd go out, they'd end up going out so far, but as the cod kept moving, it was time to get another boat. So he had a 45-foot fiberglass boat built, and in fact it wasn't 45, it was 4411, because under the classification of DFO at the time, the license that he had only allowed him to go up to 45 feet. So you had to have that 1-inch difference in the construction of the vessel because of DFO rules. So it couldn't be a 45-footer, it had to be a 4411. And so that was the vessel we had, and that's the final boat that we had. It was called the Theo and Sons. And it was decked over as well, and it was a longliner. And that's the one that we ended up fishing off of Bankroll Bank on. And I can tell you, having had I'd made one trip with them before I went for a full season. And I won't tell you how sick I was that time, but I ended up after, just before the cod moratorium in 1992, was after my first year university, when one of the members of the crew decided he was going to go work somewhere else and not go out fishing. I made the suggestion to my dad that I could go out with them. I was just a university student. I was used to baiting trawls. I was used to dressing fish, and I'd try to hold up my end of the bargain and certainly pull my weight on deck. We ended up fishing that summer. On average, when we would leave, it would take anywhere from 16 to 20 hours to get to the fishing grounds, almost an entire day. And once we got out there, you'd put your gear out at night. It's usually early in the morning. And the reason for that is that you wanted to do it at a time when the birds were sleeping. Because as you're putting out your gear, when you're long lining, the rope's going out with these hooks with the bait on them, and they'll float for a little bit before the weight will haul them down. While they're floating, the birds are eating your bait. So if you try to put them out during the day, you use a bunch of your bait. Unfortunately, sometimes you pick up a few birds, but that's the unfortunate side effect. But they eat your bait. So we'd usually set gear around 3 o'clock in the morning. That's when we get out. And I'm happy to say, when we talk about the safety element, that my father and the entire crew were very safety conscious as they had moved to a larger vessel and when we get out there, because the boat was decked over, so there was naturally a rail that went all around it. But as on top of that, my father had insisted on putting a safety rope right along both sides and along the stern of the boat. And it would come up to about mid-chest, and it was tight. So if for some reason the boat rolled or you lost your balance, there was always a danger you'd hit the rail, which was just above your knees, and you could fall over. But with that safety rope, there was a better chance that your upper body or that your hands were going to be able to grab onto that rope and to be able to keep you on deck from falling overboard. And that's something that was just implemented on its own. It wasn't a requirement. There was nowhere that said you have to do this. Coast Guard didn't make it mandatory, but I'm proud to say that it was something we did on our own. And fortunately, every time the boat went out, it came back with the same crew. So obviously, it worked. The other thing was, whenever we'd be putting gear out at night, at that point when we'd be on the deck, it was at night. Every man on deck wore a life jacket. That was mandatory. You did not leave the house of the boat to get on deck without a life jacket during that portion of fishing. That would take about an hour, and then you'd come back in, and we'd take turns finishing our watch during the night, because where we were fishing on Bankero Bank is right in the middle of a shipping lane between either New York or here in Halifax. So you'd often have container ships going through. And I can tell you, when you're in a 45-foot fiberglass boat, at nighttime, and you got a container ship coming, you want to make sure you get out of their way. Because for them, I think the member for Digby Annapolis talked about being a grain of sand in the Sahara. Well, that's pretty much what you are out there to those vessels. And for the most part, they're on automatic pilot. So they're going a certain course, and you want to make sure you get out of their way. So, but during the day, there was still always the danger on deck. We did not wear life jackets, but again, we had the safety rope going around, and it was daytime, and you had a better chance of seeing what you're doing. And when you're long lining, you're actually taking the gear in from the house portion of the boat. So you're in a bit more of a secure area, and there's less need to be out on the deck. But obviously, certainly I know the minister and the staff have been undertaking to try to encourage more safety. And it's something where you don't really want to force the hand of individuals, but at some point there needs to be a change in the culture. And I think the minister himself has used that language of that, is that there are impressions and these ideas that any safety equipment is in the way, is going to chafe, is going to cause all these problems. But there's certainly been major advances that have been made. I believe my colleague from Argyll here spoke about the lobster fishing and when the traps go out. And I've had the privilege. We never, by the time my father did have a lobster license, but I believe there was a buyout back in the early 80s, and he had sold out at that point. Let's just say that the lobster fishery, I think for a full season, I believe he said that his total landings were 1,200 pounds. So needless to say, that wasn't much of a lucrative fishery. So he got out of it. But I've had the chance over the last number of years to go out with some friends on a Saturday or Sunday, and it's pretty amazing to watch how it works. And even to this day, almost all the crews do not wear any life jackets or any sort of protection, and yet you've got, in our case, I think it's 275 pots. Each time that pot's coming in, there's rope all around the deck, and when that pot goes overboard and the boat's